Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rob. Let's draw Wonder Woman, Huntress, Vixen, Hawkgirl, and Black Canary. These 5 women are characters from the Justice League, and specifically we'll be drawing them in a recreation of a scene from the Justice League Unlimited TV series, wherein Wonder Woman is mind-controlled and has to do battle against the other 4. This is a request from someone who asked that I draw a more action-oriented scene. So we'll be drawing these 5 women engaged in battle, but since it's Wonder Woman, we know that she'll actually be on top. I mean, she is arguably one of the most powerful out of the 5. So for the composition, I've decided to place her squarely in the center of the image. I'll have the other women sort of surrounding her, which implies, just from the positioning, that the central figure is the stronger, the more important character. She'll have some of the other women in various grabs, poses of submission, things like that. I really want to sell the idea, just at a glance, that Wonder Woman is commanding the situation and that she is leagues above the other 4. And really, to make sure that I'm selling this sense of movement, of action, I'm trying to avoid having lines of motion that move straight up and down. What I mean by that, you can see here how Wonder Woman is sort of grabbing this one character by the neck. And that creates this sort of line by the orientation of the arms and legs and the body, things like that. It creates a line that sweeps up into the corner of the image. And to continue that line, I've got another character being held by the hair, and her entire body sort of points down to the opposite corner of the image. This creates one fluid sweep when glanced at and taken as a whole to sort of give motion to the image. And to counterbalance that, to make sure that I'm not leaning too much in one direction, I've placed 2 other characters opposite that, so you have this nice X going on. With this composition though, as I'm sketching it out, I'm beginning to feel like, well, maybe I'm not getting enough motion. I mean, yes, there are vertical lines, but Wonder Woman herself, Wonder Woman's basic line, when you look at from her leg going up her torso into her head, that's actually a very vertical line. And despite having this really grand sweep made up of the 3 figures, it still feels very vertical. So I make a mental note of that, and at this point I'm just continuing on, fleshing out details, making sure I get the other characters blocked in. But I'm going to go back, and I know this already, that I'm going to go back and I'm going to change this composition just a little bit. Nothing too drastic, but definitely we could do with some tweaking. So I'm blocking in a bit of the costumes, just so I can make sure that I take care of all the overlap, because there's a lot of levels of depth here. So to save myself a little bit of sanity, and just so I don't have too much going on on the screen at once, I'm taking time to flesh it out so that I can erase the guidelines and end up with a really clean sketch that I can start working from. As you can see, there's a lot of erasing going on. It's always important, even if you know that you're going to completely obfuscate, completely overlap something. It's really important to draw through things, to draw through the figure and make sure that you're getting everything placed correctly. It does seem kind of redundant, yes, to draw something that you're going to erase just a few minutes later, but it's really important that you draw through so that you can actually see, just for yourself, how everything is constructed. It's very difficult to keep this straight in your head without doing so. Okay, so now here I've got the sketch pretty well done. I'm kind of happy with it, so I've already started adjusting the composition. What I really want to push is the diagonal sense of the overall image. I want to get this impression of movement off of the vertical or horizontal plane. I don't want vertical or horizontal lines. In any composition, when you have lines that point straight up and down or straight left and right, it creates this sense of peace, of stability. Think of a cityscape, things like that. It's very grounded, motionless. When you have diagonal lines, because these don't appear in nature naturally, diagonal lines strike the viewer as something in movement, something that's unsettling, something exciting. And so that's what you want to try and make sure that you have in an action scene. A lot of diagonal gestures, a lot of diagonal sweeps. So here you can see I've tilted the entire thing 45 degrees from the initial sketch, and now it feels much more alive. It feels like it's really moving. I had to shrink it down though, because I want to make sure that I keep all these characters' faces within the composition. So Vixen would have been left out had I not done that, but the benefit is that now Hawkgirl has more space for her wings, and her wings are angled such that they counterbalance the overall gesture, the overall movement of the entire scene, to create just a little bit of balance. So you've got this sweep from the left going down to the right, and then from the right going down to the left. It's a nice ping pong, a nice sort of movement, and that's pleasing to the eye. It's generally a good decision when you're composing a scene to have that sort of quid pro quo in the motion of the image. So now I'm just filling in the flat colors. I want to use the darkest tones that I expect to use. Generally at this stage it doesn't matter what color you use, because you could just use the magic wand to pick an area and then create a selection and just work on that. But to save yourself a little bit of time, to hasten this process, it's good to use something close to the final colors that you're going to use. And in this case, well, not even in this case, but generally you'd want it to be the darkest version of the color. So that way you're adding light instead of trying to subtract it, which is a lot more difficult to try and keep straight in your head. So having gotten my flats laid out, I've selected just the characters and added a slight gradient. I want the focus to be on Wonder Woman. I know that she's going to have the majority of the light, so I made sure to do a gradient from bottom to top and top to bottom. It sort of brings that focus, that light, back to Wonder Woman in the center. This is also why Vixen is the one being chokeslammed. She has I have nothing against the character, but she has this bright orange suit that it draws way too much attention. So I placed her near the center of action just so that I didn't have to wrestle against the color of her outfit. Same thing with Hawkgirl. It made sense to put her in the back because she's wearing this sort of Bruce Lee yellow jumpsuit, and that commands too much attention. Okay, so I've got my shadow layer, my highlight layer, and now I've created a multiply layer, or excuse me, a saturation layer filled entirely with black, and doing that shows me the values I have in the image, devoid completely of color, so I'm just looking at values. And so looking only at the values, I'm going through and I'm adding in the really dramatic lighting that I want to have in this image. This is something I wrestle with a lot, even now. Values are difficult, especially when you have color in a scene. And controlling your values helps the read of a scene, and it changes the first impression that a viewer has. You can really guide the eye almost entirely with your use of values, and a lot of times I tend to rely on color, I tend to rely on detail to try and guide the eye, but in this case I'm stressing values to try and lead the read, if you will, of the scene. So by creating this extra layer, setting it to saturation mode, and filling it with black, I'm left with just the values of the colors, just the values of each pixel, which allows me to go through and on this new screen layer, add in the light. It allows me to add in the light intelligently, not just picking through and hoping that the values are correct, but I can actually see exactly what the values will be. A handy technique. So now I feel pretty good about the overall values that I have, the lighting that I have, but I feel like Hawkgirl is still taking up just a little too much interest. So I desaturated her to try and push her into the background a little bit, and now I'm very lightly airbrushing in the environment color to try and help blend her into the environment, to push her back just a little bit, to get her away from the center mass of the action. And so now that it feels about right to me, I'm going through and I'm overall rendering the details, cleaning it up, making sure that I get everything in. As you can see, I didn't bother with the faces in the initial sketch. For one, there's way too many characters for that. And two, their heads are so small when compared to the overall image that it's a fine detail that really doesn't need to be sketched in. It can be painted in when I'm rendering forms and things like that, so save myself a little bit of time. And that's a good trick to have. It's knowing that you don't necessarily need to have everything in the sketch. As long as your sketch makes sense to you, that's all that matters. It doesn't need to be, you know, this crazy detailed, beautifully drawn, drafted piece of work that, you know, can stand alone on its own. No. Your sketch is just for you. In fact, the sketching phase is really not even necessary. A lot of guys will tell you it's better to just paint straight on. Build your forms with your colors, with your values, things like that. But I personally, I'm too much of a comic book guy. I started drawing this way, and it's a very difficult transition to try and work with just forms, with just values. So the sketch for me is absolutely necessary, and perhaps you're the same way. But the sketch does not need to be this crazy detailed, very clean thing. It just needs to be enough for you to work on. So yeah, you can see that here. I'm very sloppy. But as I go through and render these forms, it comes out quite nicely. I clean up the sketch and it all disappears beneath colors and highlights, light and shadow in the end. So whatever method works for you is fine. There is no right or wrong, really.